Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're tackling a piece of source material that presents a really massive philosophical mystery. It's all about human innovation, psychology, and ancient wisdom. It basically pits our cutting-edge modern tools right up against our deeply ancient human nature. And honestly, it completely challenges the very way we view progress.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to really think about it for a second. Have you ever had a truly original thought? I mean, in a world of endless technological breakthroughs, artificial intelligence, globalized systems, it definitely feels like we're innovating every single second, right? We constantly feel like we're breaking new ground. But the text we're analyzing today argues something pretty shocking. It claims that when it comes to the human condition, your original thought, well, it might not be original at all.
To actually understand this argument, we first have to look at the super strict definition of an original idea that our source uses. An original idea requires making literally something out of nothing. It's something never before heard or seen. It is not, and this is key, it's not merely taking two known concepts, slapping a fresh coat of paint on them, and mashing them together into some useful new combination. The author is setting the intellectual stakes incredibly high here, demanding absolute originality to even qualify as a genuinely new thought.
And that brings us to Section 1, the paradox of originality.
If we accept that really strict definition of making something out of nothing, a pretty striking paradox pops up. We humans consistently claim to have stumbled upon entirely new territory, while we just stubbornly ignore these ancient, time-tested maps of the human psyche that were drawn thousands of years ago. We kind of think we've outgrown the past. The secular, modern argument claims that human advancement creates entirely new realities. Take the discovery of penicillin, which the source specifically highlights. Penicillin fundamentally shifted mortality itself. It changed a bacterial infection from what used to be an inevitable fate into just a manageable medical decision. And when science achieves something that monumental, it shifts our psychology. It creates this very powerful illusion that humanity has triumphed over nature and somehow successfully rewritten the fundamental rules of existence.
However, the source argues that this creates a massive false dichotomy, leading us to essentially mistake scientific discovery for the creation of new human truths. To illustrate this point, the text draws on ancient scriptures, framing them as these early warnings about human pride. Take this quote from Isaiah. "All day long I have held out my hands to an obstinate people who walk in ways not good, pursuing their own imaginations." The source impartially uses this to argue that modern culture proudly and stubbornly relies on its own imagination. We're totally convinced we've invented new realities, rather than just acknowledging an underlying, unchanging order.
Which leads us directly into a really profound category error in Section 2, science versus the human condition.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the contrast. Why is it that the human brain can generate this endless stream of original concepts in technology and math, but absolutely struggles to produce even a single genuinely original truth about faith, wisdom, or human behavior? Well, let's sharply contrast these two completely different realms. On one side, we have science. The text defines science as an open system of infinite complexity. It's cumulative. Each breakthrough gives us a new vantage point to decode laws we just hadn't seen yet. But on the other side, look at the human condition. The source argues this is a closed system. It's governed by an immutable, unchangeable biological and psychological architecture. Our baseline experiences, fear, love, greed, grief, ambition, they are entirely hardwired right into our design.
This brings us to Section 3, the soul's fixed geography.
You see, when the modern mind rejects ancient wisdom in the name of original thought, it commits a really classic mistake. It assumes that just because we use trendy modern psychological vocabulary, we've somehow outgrown old truths. The author uses a brilliant metaphor here, the number 5. Trying to outsmart foundational human truths by remixing our vocabulary is literally as absurd as trying to invent a fifth cardinal direction. Think about it. You have north, south, east, and west. Even if you rename those directions or invent some shiny new compass to measure them, you are still walking on the exact same earth. You cannot formulate a new foundational human emotion any more than you can invent a new primary color.
The destination that any modern philosophical framework reaches remains entirely unoriginal, and that is exactly why the text argues that this famous ancient phrase from Ecclesiastes rings with absolute logical authority. There is nothing new under the sun. The human mind can design brilliant new technological paths, sure, but our spiritual and psychological geography remains exactly as it was thousands of years ago. Which leads us to Section 4, nothing new under the sun.
Let's look at how this ancient philosophy directly applies to our everyday lives right now. Because the text argues that ignoring this fixed geography has real-world consequences. Despite all our modern tools, our apps, our advanced degrees, the source points out that modern lifestyle and financial philosophies lead directly into the exact same traps humans have fallen into for millennia. Look at this list: toxic relationships, crippling debt, poor planning, impulsive decisions, ego-driven choices. We literally have smartphones in our pockets, yet we still fall victim to the exact same behavioral pitfalls as the ancient world.
The text makes a really powerful argument here. Changing the scale, the medium, or the vocabulary of a human problem never alters its underlying essence. Sure, today we deal with digital identity ownership, artificial consciousness, globalized economic structures. But the text argues that these modern realities simply force us to apply ancient moral principles to unfamiliar landscapes. Beneath all those complex technical nuances, our core human response is entirely unoriginal. It's still rooted in ancient coveting, and it still brings about deep, unchanging anxiety.
So, the crucial point is, how do we actually apply this? Section 5, Applying Ancient Wisdom Today. If human nature is a closed system, how does the source suggest we apply ancient frameworks to modern decisions? Now, obviously, when we consult ancient texts for modern questions, there's always going to be a situational gap. The scriptures definitely won't tell you whether to buy a Chevy or a Ford. But look at this comparison. The ancient scenario of buying a camel 2,000 years ago features the exact same underlying psychological temptations as financing a truck today. Building an ancient stone tower requires the exact same structural law as building a modern tech startup. You must first estimate the cost. The tools change, absolutely, but the timeless principle remains identical.
The text uses proverbs to show how ancient wisdom addresses the unchanging character of the decision-maker, rather than the specific object being purchased. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. The source presents this impartially, not as a religious dictate, but as a structural law of human reality. Whether it's a camel or a high-interest credit card, the psychological state of being a borrower remains totally constant throughout human history.
And this brilliantly illustrates another structural law. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. It really doesn't matter if you're navigating a complex corporate merger today or planning a harvest in the ancient Near East. The human condition requires external wisdom. The author points out that relying on these timeless principles is exactly how we safely navigate those trendy new modern landscapes without falling into the timeless traps we talked about earlier.
Ultimately, the core thesis of our source material is perfectly summarized right here. The human condition does not require new fundamentals, it simply requires new applications. Science looks outward at an infinite universe, so its thoughts are infinite and cumulative. But wisdom looks inward at a finite biological mirror. Because our architecture is permanently fixed, our thoughts regarding human behavior, faith, and meaning must always return to the very same reflection.
To really drive this home, the text highlights a question asked over 2,000 years ago that just cuts right through our cutting-edge advancements. Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Whether you're anxious about the stock market, social media algorithms, or an ancient famine, the core biological and spiritual response of anxiety remains completely, undeniably unoriginal.
Which brings us to our final, pretty provocative thought drawn straight from the text. What original thought do you actually have about the human condition? Is it possible that your perceived originality, that trendy new framework you use to view your life, is actually just a modern interpretation of ancient human behavior? The source leaves us with this incredibly compelling idea that a book written thousands of years ago might just know exactly how we think today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to take this question with you into the rest of your day.